All right, it is time to begin. Good morning, everyone. We're going to be in Genesis 23 and 24 this morning. Before we begin, do that. We have 3 of the Waldron books on Genesis that were purchased by the church and were not used by anybody else. So if you want them, again, these are not these were not workbooks that were handed out to everyone, but more like teacher's guides. But we have a few extra, so we'll just go first come, first served. If you want one of them, they are up here. You can have them. In the story in Abraham's story in Genesis, so we really see chapter 22 that we talked about on Wednesday as maybe the central event, or the key event, the culmination of the growth of Abraham's faith. The New Testament points to that as the ultimate, the test, the proof of his faith, as we talked about on Friday. And so really the high point of the Abraham story comes in 22, but we still have several chapters here kind of towards the end of Abraham's life, important events at the end of Abraham's life, and events that will set up what things that will happen in his family going forward. So before we begin with chapter 23, let's start with a word of prayer. Our Almighty Father, we come to you today asking your guidance in our class, asking your guidance in all that we do today, that we learn your word according to your will, that we grow in your service by learning about your servants and how they served you and how you loved them and cared for them. And we pray that you will be with us in our class now and throughout the day. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay, so as we've been talking about throughout the quarter, we want to talk about what Genesis reveals about God and man, and how God relates to man, and therefore how we relate to each other. All those things we'll talk about in our story today. Understanding how the original readers, the Israelites, would have understood this story, and understanding how it's our story. So as we come to chapter 23, after after Abraham was tested in chapter 22, we come and we see in chapter 23 we see the death of Sarah. That Sarah dies at 27 years old. So at that point, how old would Isaac be? 37, right? Okay. She was 90 years old when he was born. All right. So now he's 37 at the death of his mother Sarah. So she dies in the land of Hebron, and we're told that Abraham mourned and wept for her. But after that time, then after his weeping, he goes to the Hittites. In other words, the people of the land around him, and to speak to them about a burial plot for his wife who has died. And he says that he is a sojourner, that he's a foreigner among them, and he asks them to give him property so that he can bury his dead. And they respond that he is like a prince of God among them, and they are happy for him to bury his dead in one of their tombs. But he responds and begins this kind of negotiation process with them, and they show a lot of deference to each other, right? He rises, he bows before them, and he says that if you are willing, he's sort of just talking to a group here, out, this group of elders out in the gates of the city. We see that idea. It doesn't mention specifically the gates here. But he's out there talking to the group of them, and he says, if you are willing, then find me Ephron, and that he would like the cave of Machpelah, and again, stating that that they would give it to him, that he would pay the full price for it. Yeah.
So he had a choice of different ones, and that's the one that he chose. Is that correct?
Yes. And it's interesting, I guess to that point, we're told that she died in Hebron, And where are we told that the cave is? The cave of Machpelah. What else are we told about it? In verse, yes, it faced Mamre. Okay, has he seen Mamre before? He has. Anybody remember where or when? So a little bit before that. So when God shows him after he and Lot separate, and God shows him the whole land, then we're told that he goes to Mamre. So this is back in chapter. I've got this on a slide, so that's I'm getting ahead of myself. But then we're told he goes to the land of Mamre. So this is chapter 13 at the very end, verse 18. Okay, that he goes settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and built an altar to the Lord. Okay, so he worships God there. So yeah, so this is part of a place that we've seen him travel there before, and apparently he would have noticed and seen this area, and decides that that's a good area where he would want this cave is where he would want the.
Now, did he own that part of the land where that altar was already, or?
He did not. So this entire negotiation is him asking them to give him the land, and he ultimately purchases the land. And that's why he starts beginning saying, I'm a sojourner, I'm a foreigner among you. This is their land. They own the land, and he's just traveling through. Okay? So as he goes through this negotiation, as he had asked for Ephron the Hittite, Ephron steps forward and says yes, that he's happy to give him he's happy, that's our words, but that he's willing to give him the land, he says, I'll give it to you. He says, I'll give you the cave, so that you can bury your dead. But Abraham responds, again, very respectfully, but says that he will pay for it. That he will pay for the land, not to be given to him, but that he would pay for the land. And at that point, Ephron says, well, the land is worth 400 shekels of silver, but what's that between you and me? So Abraham does then weigh out the shekels in front of everyone, in front of all the witnesses. He weighs out the exact amount and pays for the land. And it specifically tells us twice that the land was deeded over to him, right? In the witnesses of all the people, the land was deeded over to him, and so then he, as a possession, right? Okay, so in verse 18, at that point then, it was made over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites. After this, Abraham buried his wife there in the cave of the field of Machpelah. All right, and again, repeating that it was made over to Abraham as property, okay, when it was not before. Yeah.
And just reading through this story, they're both being very insistent on, I'll give it to you, because they know that, Abraham is blessed, and everybody that he comes in contact with gets blessed, so they wanted to give it to him. But I believe Abraham wanted to buy that and purchase it and make it a solid deal, because, of course, we're going to find out later that more of him and his relatives are going to be buried there also. But Abraham didn't want any kind of dispute saying, well, we gave you this land and now we're going to be sketchy about it. It's his, and it's all his.
Yes, and I agree with that. And I think that's a primary reason why he insists on paying for it, is that, and insists that everything be done properly with witnesses. I think that's a very important part, that he knows he's a sojourner, and he doesn't want any future question about who the property belongs to, right? To your point, this is going to become a family burial site. This is for Sarah for now, but ultimately this is going to be a family burial site for generations, and so he's planning for that.
I had never noticed until reading it this time, verse 17. So Ephron's field, which is in that field, which faced Mamre, the field, and the cave, which was in it, and all the trees which were in the field, that were within the confines of his border. I mean, this is a very specific statement.
Yeah.
So he can, I can cut the trees down, the trees are mine, the land is mine, the cave is mine, It's a lot more specific than.
Yeah, and we do the same thing, right? We're very specific when we're talking about buying property, right? We have a survey that shows exactly what property we're talking about. We don't just, like we do with, go to the store and buy a piece of furniture, right? And it takes an hour and we're done. This is like a big process with contracts. And you see all of those elements and elements of negotiation. I think it's very interesting just from a pure, legal or historical standpoint to kind of see the customs, how they go about this process is very interesting. Yeah.
And that's the other thing that I noticed about this, it's not just a little tiny tomb.
Right.
And that's it. This is a piece of property and a piece of land.
Yeah.
It's obviously, we don't know how big it is, but it's not just the tomb. It's much bigger.
Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, I would give anything to see the property and see just how big it is and all that. Also, do we know where this was at?
So there is a traditional site. Of course, we know where Hebron is, and so there is a traditional site of the Cave of Machpelah. It's covered like most traditional sites in Israel. It's covered by a church or a mosque or something, so it's not just an open place like you would like it to be. Like most things over there, there's a large structure, so they kind of.
It's called the Mosque of Abraham.
Yes. So, but that's where people believe that is the location. Jesse, did you have your hand up?
I think traditionally, didn't people want to be taken back to where all of their family originated from? So wasn't he kind of making a statement by purchasing this land and within this is the future promised land, right?
Yes, and I think that's the ultimate point of this whole story. Okay, is the fact that Abraham is choosing not to go back to his homeland, right? A lot of people will be buried, in their homeland or where they grew up, right? But he's specifically choosing to be buried in the land, and because this is going to become a family burial plot, all right? So he negotiates with the Hittites. That word Hittites means the sons of Heth. Heth was one of the sons of Canaan back in chapter 10, verse 15. So in other words, it's just telling them these are Canaanites, right? These are the people of the land. Abraham's description of himself, we mentioned that he's a sojourner and a foreigner. But then their description, what is their description of him? When they respond to him, what do they say how do they describe Abraham?
He's a prince.
Yeah, a prince of God. All right? So these are not believers in the one true God. These are idolatrous, pagan people. But yet, somebody, I think you mentioned it, somebody mentioned, again, that they see Abraham is well known, and for good reason. We've seen his wealth, even though he's a traveler, even though he's a sojourner, he is a wealthy person, and so he's like, it's not just him and his little family, he has a whole kind of traveling, I don't know what you call it, like entourage, like a whole
Caravan.
group, there's servants, and there's, a caravan, exactly, all right, so they call him the Prince of God, so you see this respect for each other amongst them. I think that, again, it's very interesting how the deference they show to each other in this process, which a lot of it may just be, again, sort of this cultural negotiation. It's interesting, we mentioned Abraham insists on purchasing the property. When you notice at the very beginning, Abraham's request is, so this is verse 4, give me property among you for a burying place, right? So he asked them to give it to him, and of course he's wanting to pay for it. But give them the property, and their answer is, verse 5, bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. Right? So you see there's a subtle change there. They're saying, you can bury your dead, and we're happy for you to bury your dead in any of our tombs. But that's not what he asked for. He asked for them to sell it to him to become his, right? So then he responds, again, sort of in this deferential way, but again, asking them to give it to him and then specifying the specific property that he wants. Ephron, again, at the very beginning, says, that's okay, I'll give it to you. You can have it. It can be yours, but then Abraham comes back and says, I'm paying for it.
yeah, I would say that his issue that Abraham's the first one who says, for the full price, let him give.
Right.
He's the one that mentions price first.
Right. Yes, exactly. So so that he's gonna pay the full price. So he's gonna pay the market price, right? And in the process of the negotiation, eventually they establish the market price. It mentions a couple times that he does this with witnesses that everyone's seen. There's what we would call a contract, right? That everyone sees it, that is specifically deeded over to him to be his property.
And I guess the other thing I want to mention is, we remember Christ was buried in a tomb, and it was a new tomb. And I think I don't know that it actually says, but this is a tomb where nobody's been buried yet.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because it just calls it a cave, right? It doesn't call it an existing burial place. It's just a cave that he makes into a burial place. So I would agree with that. That's a good point. All right, so again, as we mentioned, he's been here before. He worshipped here in this area, so he knew it. All right, so then why is this story important? And really, we've already said that it's Abraham demonstrating faith in God's land promise. Okay, because again, this is not just going to be for Sarah. Abraham himself is going to be buried here. His descendants are going to be buried here. We're going to see that. And so what was God's land promise to Abraham?
All land is ready.
Yeah, the land that he would show him, and then as he walked throughout the land, remember after he separated from Lot, he took him up on the hill to show him and say, look, east, west, north, south, all this land that I will give you. But Abraham himself is journeying, right? Again, emphasized in the text here that he's just traveling throughout the whole time. He doesn't ever receive any of the land personally as a possession, except for this story, what he buys specifically in this case. And the reason he's doing that is because it's going to be a family burial plot. So again, he doesn't go back to his land where he's from. He is demonstrating faith in God's land promise that he isn't going to see. He's going to die before his descendants receive the promised land, but he's demonstrating faith that God's going to do exactly what he said, even after he dies. Okay? All right. Other comments on chapter 23? Okay, so chapter 24 then, we're at the beginning, we're told that Abraham is old. All right, so
happen if this happened immediately after, well, it didn't happen. Well, we don't know exactly. We know by the end of chapter 24, it's 3 years after Sarah's death. Okay, so somewhere Abraham is at least 137. How do we know that? Right, and Abraham is 10 years older than her. Okay,
so Abraham's 137. We're told specifically that God has blessed him again, as he had promised that he would. God has blessed him. It's kind of funny to me. It feels like we've been talking about how old Abraham is for a long time, really since the beginning, right? When God called him from the beginning, he was 75. So, and then we talked about, well, time advances, and now he's 86, and then eventually when they appear to him, he's 99, and when Isaac is born, he's 100, and we keep talking about how old he is. Well, now he's 137, and we're talking, he's old, okay? But the point is, he's well advanced in years, and so he's really, you see Abraham kind of taking care of his affairs, right? He's buried his wife. Even in the negotiation with Abimelech, he's sort of, he clarified the rights to the water from the land. And now, what's the big task in front of him?
Find a wife.
Yeah, a wife for his son. Okay, so his son is 37. He wants to find a wife for Isaac. So the first few verses of this chapter, verses 1 through 9, we'll just stick there now, and then we'll kind of go on. The first few verses, we see Abraham instructing his servant. So the process of finding a wife for his son is going to go through his servant or his steward. It talks about his steward, and we'll talk more about him, but we're just introduced to him that this was the oldest of his household who had charge of all that he had. Okay? So the text doesn't use the word steward, but that description is what we would think of as a steward, right? So again, this is Abraham there's many people traveling with him. It's like a whole kind of town traveling together. And so he has a lot of servants. So this is the servant, the head of the servants. Okay? So yes, he's a servant, but he's a very trusted servant. Think of him as, his right-hand man, kind of.
Is it possible that this is Eliezer?
It's possible.
In 15, he brings up, he said, one born in my house is my heir. It's Eliezer of Damascus.
Yeah, it's possible. The only thing that's weird to me is that it names him back then, and it doesn't. Why wouldn't it name him here if that's who it is? Why wouldn't it say Eliezer? I don't know. We're never told. We're just continually told that he's his servant, his steward. Or it doesn't give his name. So my guess is no, but I can't say that's possible. Okay, so what do we see about Abraham? I asked for those who did the assignment. What do we see about Abraham? And really, Abraham's part of the story is just verses 1 through 9 here in his instructions to his servant. What do we see? What do we learn about Abraham or his character based on these first 9 verses?
Well, for one, he's definitely God-fearing, and he does not want his son to be marrying any of the women from Canaan, because they're all idolaters.
Okay. All right, so first of all, he has this very high-level concern for his son's marriage, right? He is very focused on doing this a specific way, and I guess, taking care of this in a good way, and specifically, first of all, that means not taking a wife from the daughters of the Canaanites. All right? So he already knows, and we go back to chapter 15, remember verses 16 through 20, God has already told him that the Canaanites are cursed. Remember, God told him, the story of Exodus, that his descendants are going to go to a foreign land and then come back, and that's going to happen because the Amorites, the people of the land, are under a curse to be destroyed. So Abraham does not want his husband's wife to be from amongst the people of the land, from amongst the Canaanites. All right, what else?
So then he sends him to Abraham's brother.
Yeah.
Basically, is where he gets sent.
Yeah. So he says, take a wife, go to from my own people, take a wife from his own people. Now, so that's not from amongst the Canaanites, that's not from amongst those who are cursed. I also think we need to be a little bit careful here, because are his family God-fearing people?
They are worshipers too.
Yeah, they're not. Okay? Remember, this story with Rebekah is gonna ultimately go through Laban, and we're gonna learn a lot about Laban. All right, he's polytheistic, they worship multiple gods, they have household idols. These are not, people who fear the one true God. But at the same time, I think at least the idea is they're not on the same level of the Canaanites, the people who are under God's curse already in the land. Yeah.
But this has a bearing on the story, time, and circumstance. It's a little ahead, but it has something to do with this. When Israel gets to Laban changes almost everything.
Yeah.
With the 2 wives and the concubine. Then he don't want Israel to come back there. Now Israel's going to be mixing in with all kind of people. Judah's going to marry Canaanite, Syria Canaanite, got other wives. Maybe Dan might have one. And Tamar, we don't know if she's Phoenician or whatever. And then Joseph goes over and gets an Egyptian woman. So before this, there was no mixing. Now it's mixing all over the place.
Yeah, and I think that's a big reason for that as well, is the fact that he's, again, keeping a clear distinction between him and the Canaanites. Similar to chapter 23, right? This is my property. I'm buying this with my property. Same kind of thing. He's going to keep a clear distinction in the family line going forward. All right? So the steward then is concerned that, okay, I'm going to go all the way up there and find this person. What if she doesn't come back? What if she doesn't want to come back with me? Do I take Isaac with me up there? And what does Abraham say? No. He's very clear. You shall not take him back. Why?
No, you need to go back there.
Yeah, he might stay there, all right? So Abraham is very concerned again about the land promise.
Yeah.
And Isaac, he doesn't want Isaac leaving the land,
Yeah.
right? Because what if he doesn't come back, all right? He's supposed to be here. I have the land of promise, and Isaac is the son of promise, through whom all the promises are going to go. He needs to stay here, all right? So you go and find a way.
So I guess we need to keep in mind that they're not cursed like those other people are, the Canaanites.
Correct.
And this also, we have to look at, we're going to look ahead and obviously we're going to know a lot more about Laban. But this interaction, I believe, has a lot to do with how he decides later on to do the things that he does because of this. He knew who Abraham was. He knew he was, a man of God.
Yes.
And this probably tipped the scales to Laban to say, oh, later on, I'm going to take advantage of this. He might not have said that at that time, but this had a big impact on him.
I think so, and to that point, notice that Abraham talks here about to his steward that he says, God will guide you, his angel will go before you. In other words, Abraham is trusting that God is going to guide this process for him. All right? And really, these are the last recorded words of Abraham in the scripture. Okay? We're going to see a little postscript when we next in chapter 25 talking about his death and showing some other events, but these are the last recorded words of Abraham, again, showing faith in God's promises and concern to accomplish his will through obedience, right? That they stay obedient to God's will and his promises. All right? I mentioned Genesis 18 and verse 19 here. Remember when Jesus said, I know Bill already knows what this verse is, right? Remember when God speaking says, for I have chosen him, I have chosen Abraham that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he promised him, right? God is keeping his promises, but he specifically chose Abraham because he knew Abraham would do his part, right? That Abraham would be concerned about God's promises, and that Abraham would guide that going forward, because these promises are going to come through his family. So Abraham is guiding how that process is going to work through the son of promise.
Right.
Okay? All right. So Abraham gives these instructions to the servant, and then the servant, we're told, the servant departed. The servant leaves. He takes all sorts of choice gifts from his master. He takes 10 camels. All right, so that may or may not mean a lot to us, but that meant a whole lot to them. All right, camels were the luxury travel of the day. Right? So if he's taking 10 of them, anyone recognizing that would immediately see a person of high wealth. Okay, and he needs them to carry all the stuff that he's taking with him, because he's taking all kinds of gifts. So there's a whole group here going on this journey. The purpose of the gifts is going to be, number one, to convince them of who he is, of Abraham's wealth, which they will see immediately, and ultimately become the dowry price for the bride. Okay? So he's taking all this stuff with him. Again, a lot of whole cultural things that are totally different than the way we do things here, okay? So understanding the way things worked at the time. But he goes and he comes back to the city of Nahor now. This is probably a good point to point out a couple things here. I don't know how well you can see this. This is the genealogy of Terah. So I'm not super thrilled with this slide because it has more on it than it needs. But you see over at the top, you see Abraham, the children of Terah were Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. Haran was the father of Lot and has already passed away. Okay, we've been told that. Nahor has a son, Bethuel. Okay? And Bethuel has a daughter named Rebekah. We've already been told all of that in chapter 22. But just to kind of see it visually here, And so Abraham's son Isaac is a generation above, before Rebekah. Why is that?
Because Abraham and Sarah were so old that everybody else in the world has already had in their kids.
Exactly. They've skipped a generation because of his age, which the steward will point out when he goes to tell Laban the story. Remember, he says, my master had a child in his old age. Okay, so this is the family here. So Rebekah is Abraham's grandniece. Think of it that way. Okay. All right. This is a little map of the trip that he goes on here. Okay. So if he's somewhere down here in the Hebron area, he's going to travel all the way back up to Haran. Okay, so if you remember when Abraham first makes, as God calls him from Abraham first travels to Haran, and then from there the story picks up and tells how he travels down to the land. So the steward here is basically retracing those steps back up to Haran. Okay. All right. So he comes to Haran. There's a well. He comes to the well of water at the evening. We're told the time when the women would go out to draw water, and he prays. The servant prays to God at that point, and he asks for God to grant him success in his mission of the day, and he sets up a test with God. He says that I'm standing here by the water when the women come out to draw the water. I'll ask what the woman to draw water for me. But if she also draws water for me and also offers to draw water for the camels, then let her be the one that you have chosen for Isaac. And then we're told before he even finished speaking, before he even said the prayer, out where comes Rebekah, who we've been introduced to before. She comes out with her water jar on her shoulder. We're told that she was very beautiful, that she was a virgin, and she came down to fill her jar. We're told that the steward runs to her, asks her his question, if she'll give him water from her jar. And she does. She offers to drink, and then she quickly lets down her jar to give him a drink, and then she says, "I will draw water for your camels until they have finished." Well,
That's a lot of water.
that's a lot of water. All right, we'll come back to that. So the man just sits and watches to see that she actually does it when she does, and when they finished, he takes a ring weighing half a shekel, in other words, extremely expensive, 2 bracelets, gives them to her and says, ask her, who are you? And is there room for me to stay in your father's house? She tells him, and when he sees that she is family, we're told in verse 26, he bowed his head and worshipped the Lord, right? Because he sees that God is fulfilling everything that he asked. She's meeting all the qualifications.
And, what I take from this also is that this was a very specific prayer of very specific things to happen, and we need that to carry over to our lives and ask very specifically God what we need and what we would like to have.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think his prayer here from the beginning is the key, I guess, point of the whole chapter, really. But we'll come back to that as well. Okay, so he's worshiping the Lord. The woman goes back to her mother's house, told them about these things, and at that point we're told that that Laban is her brother, and so this discussion actually goes through Laban. So remember, if we go back to this chart, we would sort of expect her father, the negotiation to be with her father, but it's with both, and maybe even more with Laban than her brother than anything. Again, which may say something about Bethuel's age, and it probably also says something about the culture. There's other Bible examples of the importance of the oldest brother, who, again, is going to take over the headship of the family. all right, so we see that as they come to, as he comes to the house, there's, before they sit down to a meal, come in, let's have a meal, but before they eat, the steward wants to talk business, right? Before we eat, I want to tell you why I'm here, and he relays the whole story, right, all over again, in very exact details of exactly what just happened. Introducing, first of all, saying who he is, that he's from Abraham, telling them that God had blessed Abraham, that God had given him a son in his old age, and then relaying the whole story, telling him, he tells them about his prayer and how it went exactly how he had asked God to do, and gives him the whole story. And then, so the conclusion, at the end of the story, he basically asked them at verse 49, so tell me, I'm here, God has shown that she's the one. Are you going to show steadfast love? He says, verse 49, are you going to show steadfast love and faithfulness to my master? Tell me, and if not, tell me, then I turn to the right hand or to the left. In other words, if you're not going to follow through and allow her to come back with me to be Isaac's wife, then I'll move on. And what's their answer? Yeah. Yeah, what are we going to say about it? We can see clearly from your story, from everything you told us, that this is from God. Okay, so they agree, so they consent. And then they sit down, and again, we see that when Abraham, when he heard, verse 52, when he heard their words, he bowed himself to the Lord, he worships the Lord, that, that God is making this all work out. And so now, so he brings the gifts, the jewelry and the gold, and all the dowry gifts.
It just knows they use the word, the fuel, and Laban used the word, it's from Jehovah.
Mm-hmm.
So they knew something about Jehovah Jireh, they're using his memorial name.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to know what communication there had been, and it's not unusual. Like again, we've seen that even with the Canaanites, right? Called him a prince of God, right? So it's not. Polytheistic people aren't unwilling to accept God, the true God, as one of the gods,
right.
but that doesn't mean they accept him as the true God, right? So they complete the, they sit down and they eat and they have this ceremonial meal. So in the morning, he wakes up and says, okay, send me away, I'm ready to go back. Send her with me so I can go back. They're not ready to do that, but he says, don't hold me up. I'm on a mission to do this for my master. Don't hold me up. And so they say, okay, we'll ask Rebecca. We'll ask her. And what's her answer?
She goes.
She goes. All right, so I asked you guys to say, what did you think about the character of Abraham Stewart in this chapter? What did you notice? What do you see about him?
He's very faithful.
All right, he's very faithful, okay? Loyal, all right? Loyal specifically to his master, right? Okay? Again, he talks a lot throughout the chapter, over and over, about his master, the job of his master, right? Even when he talks to Laban, let me go back and fulfill my duties to my master, okay? So loyalty, faithfulness, what else?
He's responsible.
Yes.
Because some people might be faithful and loyal, but they might not be the most responsible.
Yeah, I mean, he does exactly what Abraham asked him to do, and you see, he has his dedication towards the task, right? Focus on, all right, I've got a task here, it's important, and he's just not going to be stopped until it gets done.
And it's interesting because we have been talking about the faithfulness of God, but the trustworthiness of God. We can trust him for his promises. This guy was very trustworthy.
Yes.
I mean, as you just said, he did exactly according to his master's will.
Exactly.
And God does exactly what he promises us. So he is demonstrating the quality of God.
Yes, right. Acting in the image of God, right, Brenda?
He prayed for everything.
Yes. Right, so he studied, I'll get you in a minute, Tom. He trusts in God's guidance.
Right, that's
Okay?
it.
We see that in his prayer, the very beginning of the prayer,
Yeah.
please grant me success
Yeah.
today. Okay? Right, to Tom's point earlier, that's a prayer we all probably ought to be praying way more often. Okay? And obviously this is a specific, an especially important task.
Yeah.
But God, grant me success today, right? And the test that he sets up is a test to obtain God's guidance.
Yeah.
All right? It's not, yes, it's something that Rebecca does, but he specifically sets it up in order to say, this is something so that I'm going to know that this is the person you God, have chosen for this task, okay? In verse 27, he says, the Lord has led me in the way. All right? When he repeats that to Laban, he repeats the story, he says, the Lord has led me in the right way. Right? So he's actually trusting in God's guidance for this. Yeah.
And then now we can also see part of Laban's character when he says, well, let her stay here for 10 days. And, you know, obviously the steward knows that a lot can happen in 10 days. He's like, no, we're going right now.
Yes.
And very wisely says, we're leaving.
Right. So, yes, and I don't know if he knows much about Laban, but we're going to find out later, delaying with Laban is not a good idea. And the other interesting thing, just quickly about Laban, is that there's a really interesting thing when Rebecca comes back. It says Laban sees the gold and the jewelry that he gave.
Yeah.
And he's like, ooh, and his
No
mind
joke.
eyes light up.
Money man.
Again, maybe if that's all there was, I don't think I'd think anything about it, but we're going to find out more about what Laban thinks about riches later. All right. Again, we mentioned that Abraham, the steward's faithfulness to his master. The travel time on this journey was something like 25 days. Okay, there, one way. Right. So this isn't like I'm just going to walk down the road. This is a big deal. We talked about his focus, his dedication, asking God, and his faithfulness is to his master as well. Right. He's asking God's blessings on Abraham.
Yeah.
Right. Not for himself, but that he knows he's doing this on Abraham's behalf. Okay? There's an urgency. All right? The words that, if you look through the words of what he does, he runs to meet Rebecca. He says, we're going to talk business before we eat, which is not the normal. Right? Normal, you sit down and, hey, how's the family? And you catch up on everything and then do business, right? He's doing it the other way around. He's, I don't have it on the slide, but when we mentioned, he doesn't want to get held up the next morning. He's ready to go. He is urgent. He has an urgency to complete this.
Yeah.
And then he shows thankfulness afterwards and worship to God every time, every step of the way.
Yeah.
As it becomes clear that God is fulfilling his request, he stops and worships.
Yeah.
All right, and expresses thankfulness. So, yes, pray to God. Ask him for success in the things that we're doing. And then be thankful when God provides the success, right? Tom, do you have another thing?
No, but yeah.
Okay.
You know, being very adamant about telling him all this up front shows him, again, that he's a man of integrity and responsible and all these things that we've already talked about.
Yeah. And notice in his prayer in verse 27, blessed be God, talks about God first, and then who has not forsaken his faithfulness to my master, and then he says, as for me, right? God, others, and then self. Okay? What about Rebecca's character? What do you see from Rebecca's character in the story?
Humble.
Okay, humility.
Service.
Service, yes.
Hardworking.
Okay, hardworking. All right, so part of the test, the main point of the test was was for the servant to get God's direction. Okay? But the test in itself also showed Rebecca's character and that she offered on her own. I don't know what happened there. Okay. We see, first of all, that her purity from the beginning, and her hospitality. She does the same, remember, she's the same kind of urgency. She runs. Remember, and we won't go back there because we're running out of time, but remember Abraham, when he served the men who were angels, he talked about how he did it quickly, and he ran, and the same kind of thing. And when the steward asks, is there room at your father's house? She said, yeah, we have everything you need, and come, right? So very hospitable. She goes above and beyond in her service. Camels can drink up to 25 gallons.
Oh, man.
Okay, now, this is after a long journey, right? So, I mean, we could be talking up to 250 gallons that she's drawing from a well. That didn't take 5 minutes.
Right? She's young.
Yeah, okay. Her generosity, her kindness, her service, she goes above and beyond. and then ultimately she obeys God's will for her life. We see after the steward tells it, she's willing to go. And then the interesting, she receives a blessing in verse 50. The sisters, as she leaves her, bless her. May you become thousands of 10,000. So again, this is one of those blessings that people speak, but is really a prophecy from God. And notice the second part of it, may your offspring possess the gates of your enemies. That's the same thing God said to Abraham back in chapter 22 after he was willing to sacrifice Isaac. Okay, so she's receiving the blessing of God, the ultimate blessing. All right, we're out of time. At the very end of the story, we see that Isaac is meditating. I don't think it's a coincidence that Isaac is the first to meet Rebekah. We see God kind of controlling this whole thing. There's sort of this beautiful story where she sees Isaac from afar, so she dismounts, puts on her veil. Isaac sees them from afar. The steward comes and tells him the story. So Isaac sees that it's God's will, and after seeing that it's God's will, he takes her as her wife, and we're told that he's comforted after his mother's death. So this kind of very beautiful scene of marriage and comfort of God's comfort towards him. God is keeping his people distinct from the surrounding culture. We mentioned that. And God is guiding the future of his people, right? Over and over, the details of this story show that God is the one directing this. And he's working through Abraham and through the steward and through Rebekah, people who are willing. But ultimately, God is the one guiding the future of his people. So, for today, number one, God always keeps his promises. The land promise, even the ones that Abraham never saw, God always keeps them. So stay focused on the promises. Even if it's never going to happen in your lifetime, it's going to happen. God will lead, so I should obey. Stay focused on his promises. And then, marriage, like all of our choices, but especially compared to any of our choices, is a choice that should be guided by prayer and faith.
Yeah.
Okay, so for young people, for people who still have that opportunity in front of them, your marriage should be guided by prayer and faith. And again, go back to think about the difference between how this marriage worked out compared to the marriages at the beginning of the study of Noah. Right? Remember where they just saw whoever they wanted, whoever looked good? How did that go? Not well. How did this one go? Beautiful. Right? If we ask for God's guidance in prayer and faith, maybe it won't be necessarily all the details that we have here where God is speaking directly to people, but God will guide us in those big important decisions in life. All right? All right, next on Wednesday, chapter 25 and 26, and we'll talk about Jacob and Esau. By the way, the point here then is the passing of the torch from Abraham now to Isaac and Rebekah. Yep. Right? Isaac is now the patriarch of the family who God's promises will go. Thank you.